and road rage and open discussion. This is on the Christian calendar. It's ordinary time, and so that's a perfect time for us to look at what things are like for on the road, because all of us, pretty much all of us, are either riding or driving on a daily basis. So taking our faith out onto the road is something that's worth looking into. I am Dr. Kaye P. McKee. I'm the founder and executive director of a Spacious Place Creativity and Spirituality Center. And again with us today is Dr. Janettee Henderson, a marriage and family therapist. And we're continuing a conversation that we started a couple of weeks ago. And it would be well worth your time to go on our website or here on Facebook or on YouTube and take a look at that and hear what Dr. Henderson had to say before. So we're going to get right into this. As you're listening, we're considering this an open conversation, so please, please, please send in your comments and your questions, and we will do our best to answer them. So just a little bit of a recap. Last time, Jeanette, we were talking about anger often being a secondary emotion.
Yes.
And we were also, you were talking to us about that there's both physical and cognitive markers that tell us when we're moving into anger, so we can know when that's setting in. And then some practices to help us reclaim a sense of emotional balance before we get behind the wheel and also out on the road as well. So let's just move into thinking about it a little bit differently. Let's imagine that I'm a passenger and I'm riding with someone and I'm feeling that they're moving into a place of road rage. Are there actions that I can take to help to diffuse that situation before it turns violent?
I think there are. I think the very first thing you would want to do is stay as present as possible, because that way you may be able to pick up on some of the cues even before the individual might be. And things that then you can do to disrupt that buildup, that escalation, would be to maybe decrease distraction. If there has been the radio, no matter what kind of music is on, you might want to turn that off.
Okay.
If you're staying present, that means you're calm, in your most calm voice. You want to talk with that person in a way that helps them maybe disrupt that escalation that they may be experiencing. The more you can redirect them into the conversation with you. Sometimes this also might involve reaching out and touching them. You want to be careful that you don't startle them.
Don't shock them. Yeah.
Right. That if they can see that you're coming and you're able to put your hand like on their shoulder or maybe their knee, that also will serve as a type of disruptor. Hopefully help them be more present to the situation where they can make more of an informed choice.
Okay. So you were talking about involving them in a conversation. Would that be about something other than what's going on the road? Would it be about how are you feeling right now? Do you have any guidance about what sort of thing we could talk with them about?
You know, sometimes it's just a validation. Lead with validation.
Okay.
Wow, that person really cut it close, didn't they? Right? Instead of that person continuing to think about that driver who behaved in some inappropriate fashion, it may then start the conversation between the two of us that, yeah, they really did. They almost caused me to crash. Good thing that we didn't. So it begins to externalize it versus that more just internal process that can ramp it up.
Okay. And you had mentioned as well at one time about saying you did a great job of making sure we didn't get in an accident or whatever.
That validation that allows that person to be more present to what's happening inside the car versus things that may be outside of the driver's control, right, in another vehicle or situation. And so just definitely making that person known that I saw what you did and you did a great job, or wow, I don't know how you did that, but I sure am glad that you did. Once again, it keeps that focus in this present moment, not that one that just passed, that we can no longer do anything about.
Oh, okay, all right. So it seems to me that one of the key markers for one of the key markers for actions that lead to road rage is an addiction to hurry. And that seems to me to come from a place of our self-worth being based on our level of busyness. So when we're driving, we pull into an intersection before other cars or pedestrians have cleared it. Or we're darting through traffic, trying to get ahead, or blocking the box at a traffic light. So do you have ideas about ways that we could base our self-worth on something more dependable and long-lasting than a packed calendar?
Actually, I do. I think that's a little bit of a complicated response in how to think about that. I take that all the way back to 1982 when a physician named Larry Dawsey introduced the concept of time sickness. And basically what he said is that the negative effects of trying to beat the clock are pretty profound. Everything from heart disease to disturbed thinking to basically mental exhaustion. And so many of us do suffer from this, and because we're obsessed with the belief that time is limited, that time is rushing by, there's never enough of it, it's slipping out through our fingers, and that we in turn have to work and do faster and faster just to keep up. The difficulty with this is that race against the clock is going to prime us, right, for this hurriedness, and therefore we can get into this without maybe really recognizing that we do have conscious choices about how we think. And so I tend to encourage folks to consider the old adage that the best defense is a good offense. Because when we're able to tap into that, we can take a more proactive approach versus that more passive stance that can turn into a strategic advantage for us before we even get behind the wheel. We can start this by really learning to focus our attention. And one of the best ways to do that is to get more intentional about being present in the moment that we're in versus that focus on doing the next thing on our to-do list. Another thing that we can do is to be clear about our priorities. Most of us really have a deep desire to be healthy in body, mind, and spirit. And when we can be clear about that with ourselves, then things like being on time, being early, having a lot to do, working more, become secondary. There is also a sense of empowerment if we can remember that we and we alone have control over our own thoughts and feelings. Other people really can't make us. That I can choose how I want to respond to any given situation versus that default into reactivity that is often about taking things personally, the blaming and the shooting on other people, and that feeling the loss of control instead of the sense of empowerment. Along with that is the ability to define time for ourselves, right? How we think about time, what our relationship with time really is. For example, is it something that is very precious, or is it a harsh taskmaster?
Oh, okay.
Right? Is it a gift, or is it an enemy or adversary to be defeated? There's a lot of ways we can actually think about it if we get more conscious, if we stay more present, if we're more intentional, if we remember that really we are the ones in control, not time.
Is there a practice or a metaphor we can have in mind that could give us a sense of time as something that is a gift to us rather than a taskmaster? Do you have any ideas about ways we might enflesh that in our own lives day to day?
You know, that's a really good question. I think it does matter how we internalize, how we begin to think whether or not we are grounded, whether we're living out of the beliefs that we have that are conscious, or whether or not we're sliding into the culture that defines for us.
So maybe to take some time on a daily basis to remember what our values are and to connect with the divine in whatever way is meaningful to us.
That's really well said, because talking about how we've kind of been sliding on that slippery slope is to think about our Puritan heritage, which basically gave us the concept of idle hands or the devil's workshop. And what we in this culture have done is taken that to an extreme, so that our national obsession is around productivity. More is better. Faster is better. The more I do, the better I am. That it's no wonder so much of us have time sickness.
That term is a powerful term to me.
It is. It truly is. Somewhere along the way, as we have moved into the sickness, the unhealthiness, we've lost that sense of balance that we have, of understanding that good works alone are not what bring us happiness. They don't make us better than other people. It's not something that brings us closer to God, and it's not something that contributes to that primary goal of being healthy in body, mind, and spirit. And how I think about it is that somewhere along the way we have lost that sense of centeredness, and we've begun to equate our internal self-worth with our external net worth.
Oh, that's well said. And that's a lot about the perception other people have of us as well. And as you're talking, it just, to me, I'm reminded of the difference between Puritanism and the Benedictine model of work, study, and rest, and that being the three parts of the stool.
And so it's really interesting, because I think that's exactly your prior question, right? Are there practices? That's a wonderful model. I think that would help us to be healthier in body, mind, and spirit.
All right, we'll go with Benedict then.
I'm in.
I'm aware that whenever I see something on the news that's related to road rage, or I'm driving and I witness it either firsthand or I see it happening somewhere near me, I have this sense of helplessness. And I'm wondering if there are some practices that we could recommend to folks that would help them feel like they have some positive agency in the face of the kind of violence and the feelings that come up for us when we witness road rage.
So, really good question there, because I think most of us, without much thought, think that we're pretty good drivers, right? We don't do driving errors, so to speak. And so I think a useful place is beginning to do a self-inventory around our own driving practices. And it can begin with a simple question: am I an aggressive driver? Right?
And what are some markers for that? How would we know we're aggressive?
So if you say yes to any of these,
Okay.
then I think you want to do that serious thinking about before you get behind the wheel,
Okay.
right? Because this means you're predisposed,
All right.
right? So things like tailgating,
All right.
not using your signals, cutting other drivers off, honking, speeding, mentally or verbally berating other drivers, flashing your headlights, things like obscene gestures or menacing looks, and cutting in and then braking or blocking the box at a traffic signal.
Mm-hmm.
Any of these potentially, right, could lead to dangerous driving. These are signals for aggressive driving.
Okay. And so, let's say that I'm saying, oh, I see myself in that. What would be my next step?
So preventative type measures, one would be making that conscious decision. Remember the value of staying present is to always leave an ample distance between you and the driver in front. That way if people do move over into your lane, you have more opportunity. You probably are not doing that extreme braking. Leave in plenty of time. This goes back to addressing the hurriedness issue. When we are late before we ever get behind the wheel, yes, it's going to ramp us up, right? And so try to adjust your own internal time clock, so to speak, and leave with ample time to get you there. Never make rude gestures to other drivers. Just don't do it. Another thing I think that sometimes we get into without realizing how much it can escalate us is conversations we're having within our own vehicle.
Oh, yeah, okay. Especially if you have someone, perhaps you have children in the back seat and they're arguing, that sort of thing?
Yes. Don't try to discipline your children while driving, right? There may be a time for discipline. It's probably not when you're behind the wheel. Also, other passengers, children or adults, don't get into disagreements with them, right? Because your focus is already distracted and you have the difficulty of trying to do two things at once when we know the brain can only do one thing well at a time. So, excuse me, do remember to ground yourself emotionally and physically behind or before you get behind the wheel. We talked about this last time.
Right.
There are things that you can do like breath focus, the imagery, the use of affirmations, and then also talking about the second breath, which would combine some of those things. I think it's also useful to remember we can develop a habit pretty easily, and we can do it really conscientiously if we will remember to breathe before we get in the car, while we're in the car, after we get out of the car. Just make that part of the practice. And we can also practice words of affirmation or gratitude at those times as well. It's very powerful to combine a cognition, a word, with an autonomics part of our process.
Oh, cool. Well, and I just wanted to follow up with that with a short story about an experience we had firsthand with road rage and how to, the way we dealt with it, which was my husband was driving and a woman did not like that he was in the lane that she was in, and she was following us, laying on her horn, and I could see in the rearview mirror that she was screaming at us and a terrified child sitting beside her. She followed us into a parking lot. We went into the store. I saw her walk next to our car, get in her car and leave. And when we came back, she had keyed the entire side of our car. And it made me physically ill. And when I would drive it for weeks after, that's what I would feel. But I also had this sense I didn't want to cover it up. I wanted to transform it. So I prayed about it. And we turned it into a branch, and then all of our participants in our Spacious Place activities made themselves as little spacious students, like blossoms coming over that branch. So any way that you can apply your own creative potential to a situation of violence, I think is a step in the right direction. So, just before we wrap up, Janettee, is there any thing that you would like to leave us with, any takeaways from what we've said today that you'd like to reinforce for folks?
You know, I do think one of the important things to remember is that if we are on the roadways at all, it's probably unavoidable. It's unrealistic to think that we will never either witness a road rage incident or be involved in one or be exposed to a media report around a road rage incident. And so thinking from an empowering standpoint, how can we deal with that? What are some positives that maybe if we stay conscious and present that we can implement? So let me say this, if we are involved directly in any sort of road rage incident, the first thing to do is to exit from active traffic, all right, and go to a safe location. Breathe and consider the ramifications of the situation and any choices that might be made. Never think that you can handle the situation yourself, right? By taking things into your own hands, you actually might be creating a tremendous amount of risk for yourself, any passengers, other drivers. And so consequences can be quite severe. What we know is many times it involves the legal system, and those are extremely unpleasant, but also just the danger of your own bodily harm or that of others is cause for pause.
Yeah.
That's how I think about it. Now, if you witness a road rage incident, you're not directly involved, it is still a good idea to exit from traffic so that you can assess the situation. If you perceive any of the drivers or yourself to be in any sort of imminent danger, this is the time to call the police immediately. Once again, don't take matters, don't think you can solve it, you can intervene, you can help, right? If we see road rage in the media, which unfortunately is more and more an occurrence, I think the first thing we can do is to refrain from blame. It is very easy to see others to blame and ourselves as blameless. I would never do that. I wouldn't do anything like that. Again, our shared humanity indicates to us that we can and will, given the right circumstances, create harm to ourselves and our others. A final thought when we are thinking about road rage is to be able to pray for all the parties involved, right? Both the perpetrators and the victims, ourselves, because at the end of the day, what we really are is coming from a place where our deep spirituality is that we are all connected and we are all worthy of understanding, love, and compassion, that we are called to love even those that we decide that are the less thans.
And that includes loving ourselves when we let ourselves down and don't do as well when we're driving as we wish we had.
Yes, a little gray space. It's a good idea.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. I have found this very helpful. If it has been helpful to you, we hope you will like it on Facebook. Visit our website, www.aspaciousplace.com. You can sign up for our newsletter there. And again, this one and the one prior will be on Facebook, on YouTube, and on our site. So you can pause it and listen again to what Dr. Henderson had said, whatever you would find helpful. And just so you know, our next Ordinary Time Creativity Practice will be August the 5th, same time, 2:30 Central Daylight Time, and we hope you will join us. I thought it would be appropriate for us to close with the prayer of St. Francis. So, let's pray. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Amen.